Our next conversation today is with former Democratic Congresswoman Yadira Caraveo. Welcome back. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back.
So you are running for the seat that you held for one term, representing Colorado's 8th Congressional District, which is mainly Adams and Weld counties. So voters hired you in 2022. They fired you in 2024. Why should they hire you back in 26?
Because the work that I started is still left to be done, and it's something that Representative Evans is not concentrating on. The fact that he has endorsed budgets that will cut Medicaid for up to 73,000 people in our district, the fact that he is endorsing the tariffs that are really directly affecting Colorado agriculture in particular, and that he has not moderated himself at all. He ran as a moderate, he lied. He is governing as an extremist, and so I think that he is vulnerable and should be in the next election.
We're going to talk about the Medicaid cuts in just a bit. We're going to return to that. Why do you think you lost?
You know, I think it's a multitude of factors, but this is designed to be a competitive district, right? There's a pretty even number of Republicans and Democrats, and actually most of the district is unaffiliated. And so it's going to swing back and forth. Certainly there were things on the national level that probably affected the outcome, but despite that, I outran Kamala Harris in every single demographic and area. I gained ground in the Republican areas where Mr. Evans should have done better. And I think ultimately it was just the country was swinging right, and this is a district that tends to go wherever the country is swinging.
Yeah, if I recall, you'd know this better than I would, but I think in 2020, Biden won the district by like 4.6.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
You won really narrowly
right.
Against Republican Barb Kirkmeyer. Mm-hmm. This time around, Trump won the district by like 1.8 points, and Evans won it by less than a point.
Exactly.
Do you think it's going to be one of those things that that just kind of wherever the prevailing winds are, it's going to go back and forth? How much do you think the candidates in the race in that district matter?
I think the candidates certainly matter. The fact that I have a family history, that I was born and raised here in Colorado and have lived most of my life in the district, that I made an effort to really understand not just the Latino part of the district, but the district as a whole, including people in agriculture and serving in the agriculture community. I think that's why I made a lot of headway. But like you said, it is a swingy district, and it's possible that in the future it'll go back and forth.
So you spoke openly about some of your mental health challenges while you were in Congress, to the point that you checked yourself in for inpatient treatment at Walter Reed. Not that being a pediatrician, your main job is like an easy thing to do, but why would you subject yourself to all of the nastiness, all of the long hours of going back to Congress when it took such a toll on your health the first time?
You know, it's really, my health has probably not been at its optimum for 20 years or so. And it's something that Congress, with that extra pressure, probably uncovered. But it also gave me the advantage of being able to go to places like Walter Reed, Johns Hopkins, and get incredible medical care that every single person should really be entitled to. So I think it's more of a testament that I've had this lifelong, and that Congress gave me the opportunity to understand it in a different way. And I want to go back to make sure, just like with the fact that I'm speaking about it so publicly, that people out there know that there's help, that they should get help, and that they can get better.
So as folks evaluate your performance during your first term, knowing that you've been open about your mental health challenges during the first term, are there things that you wish that you had done or handled differently that you attribute to your health that you'd ask voters to take into consideration?
You know, I think certainly it affects depression and other mental health issues affect your ability to relate to others, right? Despite that, I know from my constituents and many of the groups that I work with that they appreciated that I'm an active listener, that I talk to everybody. I don't close myself off from conversations that maybe we don't agree on. I think that will only be better now that I've gotten treatment. But certainly there are moments where the darkness and the depression really overwhelms you, and it affects how you relate to other people, including staff members, friends, family. I know it put pressure on everybody that I was in contact with.
How are you feeling these days?
I'm feeling much better.
It's good to hear.
Very good.
Our Marshal Zellinger noticed that your medical license is going to expire this week.
Yes.
Do you plan to continue practicing?
Not full time. You know, one of the things that come with Medicaid cuts is that those of us who are providers that see mainly Medicaid patients your job possibilities get kind of tenuous. And because of that, there's not a position in the clinic where I used to work. And so that's been part of my calculation. I will definitely renew my license and maybe go back and spend a few days every quarter in clinic, but I'm not going back full time because I want to concentrate on all of the issues that I saw in clinic that I couldn't fix as a doctor, whether it was funding for education, the cost of food and shelter, so many different things that affect the health of kids that I can get to as a legislator, but not as a pediatrician.
Gotcha. I know you had to scale back when you were in the state legislature and then when you were running in that kind of thing. When was the last time that you worked full-time as a pediatrician?
As a pediatrician full-time, 3 years ago.
It was 3 years ago, okay. Before you can face Republican Rep. Gabe Evans in a 2026 rematch, you'd first need to win a Democratic primary. So a lot of the questions I'm going to ask you now are kind of through that lens of how Democratic voters and unaffiliated voters evaluate you and your views and the way that you approach the job. Mm-hmm. I was struck that you launched your campaign without the endorsements of all of the key Democrats in Colorado who supported your last run for Congress, who worked with you closely. What should voters read into the fact that they're not endorsing you?
That I'm not running for other elected officials. I'm running for them. I would prefer their endorsement. I will hopefully earn their vote. And that's how I led when I was in Congress in particular, to seek that middle ground, to speak truth to my own party and to the Republican Party, because that's where the majority of the people in the 8th District are.
I understand that. Why do you think they haven't endorsed you?
It's not that they haven't endorsed me. I just have not actively sought a public endorsement.
So you think the key Democrats will endorse you in the Democratic primary? They just have not yet?
That remains to be seen.
Okay, as in remains to be seen whether you will ask them, or remains to be seen whether they will endorse you?
Whether I ask them.
Whether you ask them, okay. Do you think that the reason that they haven't endorsed you is because you voted for so many Republican messaging bills in Congress that were just kind of like a thumb in the eye to your party?
No, certainly the Colorado delegation has always understood how difficult this district is in terms of Republican versus Democrats, and always urged me to vote my district and not my party.
So one of those votes, you were one of a handful of Democrats to vote with Republicans on a symbolic measure to strongly condemn Kamala Harris for her handling of border issues. It called her the border czar, which of course was not actually her role. That was just a Republican talking point. Were you confused about her role, or did you know that this Republican bill was misleading and you voted for it anyway?
It was an attempt to say what we have been doing, what the Biden administration has been doing, and therefore, by extension, Kamala Harris, isn't working, right? There's a crisis. There was a crisis at the southern border, and nobody hid, including my own party or the administration, really focused on comprehensive reform that looked at securing the border to make sure that there were fewer illegal entries, but in particular less fentanyl coming in across the border, but also providing a pathway to citizenship for dreamers and for people who have been here for decades in many instances and are paying their dues and are part of our society. So either way, on any bill that looked at immigration, I wanted to see what the middle ground was, because that is where the majority of my constituents were.
Gotcha. And was it your assessment that this messaging bill that Republicans ran, falsely calling her the border czar and condemning her, that was the middle ground?
It was an example of the fact that that there was something wrong at the border, but also it was not a serious proposition in which comprehensive reform was looked at, but messaging.
Okay, so you would acknowledge it was a messaging bill, but you were all looking to send a message with that. Okay, has President Trump done a better job on immigration?
No. I mean, I think that what people were voting for in November was not the mass deportations that we're seeing, was not the fear-mongering that we're seeing, certainly was not deporting 2-year-olds who are citizens and have cancer. It was not separating families. I was, the reason that I endorsed Kamala Harris, despite the fact that I said that there were issues with the administration's border policy, was that she would have looked at this hopefully in a more middle-of-the-road way that looked at solutions rather than inciting fear.
When it comes to deportations, who should go, who should stay?
I think certainly there's agreement with both parties that if you are a criminal and have not spent your time in the United States really adding to our civilization, to our society, that you should not get the privilege of staying here. If you are law abiding, if you've been here for decades, really working, paying taxes, contributing to your community, there should be a pathway to citizenship.
You voted with Republicans for an earlier version of the Laken-Riley Act, which then passed after you left Congress. And one of the things that that does is that it requires immigration agents to indefinitely detain people accused of shoplifting. Why lump in shoplifters with violent criminals at the front of the deportation line?
That was another one of those messaging bills that they want you people to focus on immigrants and the supposed criminality of immigrants rather than looking at the substance of the issue. Another messaging bill that really is designed just to win districts.
And you voted for it?
Yep, it was a messaging bill that was not doing anything at the time.
But I mean, it's law now. It was the first bill signed into law by the president, so it's having real life impacts on people.
Yep, I was not there to vote on it this time.
Okay, but you voted for an equivalent bill that would have had the same exact impact. So I'm asking, you voted for a bill that put shoplifters at the front of the deportation line along with violent criminals. Why is that good policy?
What the majority of that bill did was double down on violent criminals, and every bill has aspects that you want to vote for, and sometimes pieces that you would rather not vote for, but that's not the option before you.
Did you believe that that bill materially changed the way that violent criminals were handled in the deportation system? Because when you read the assessment of immigration experts, they say that it really didn't change anything in terms of violent criminals. What it did is it took nonviolent criminals like shoplifters and put them at the head of the deportation line with the violent folks.
Right, the majority of it, though, focused on violent criminals, and you're right, it didn't do anything new.
So sometimes it's difficult to tell where you stand on immigration and border issues because you've had such a change while you've been in elected office, right? When you were in the state legislature, you talked about defunding ICE, defunding the Border Patrol. A couple of years later, you're in Congress, you're now a moderate, and you're condemning the Biden administration on border issues. When I asked you about this in a debate, you said that America had changed, and you said that you weren't voting your own values, you were voting the values of the district. Can we get into that philosophically? Like, what is your thought about when you should vote your beliefs and when you should vote the district's beliefs, even if you disagree?
The majority of the time, I would say upwards of 98%, I voted the values of the district because that is what the job description is. It's to be a representative. And when I won by only 1,600 votes, I took that as a message, not that I had a mandate to be on the left, but that the majority of the people wanted something in the middle. And that is what I strove with every single vote, with every single decision, to represent that middle ground that is the 8th district.
So let me ask you this then. If your job then is to essentially be a weather vane, you just kind of show which way you think the wind's blowing in your district, why should they elect you to be that weather vane as opposed to anybody else? Like, what are the skills that you bring to that function of the job?
Well, I have lived in the district since I was 6 years old. And with the training that I have as a doctor, my job has always been to listen to people, to take in the symptoms that they have, the difficulties that they're having, to reach a diagnosis and to say, this is how I can make you better. It is exactly the same thing as a representative. What we should be doing is not talking so much, but listening, really translating what we're hearing in the district into votes in Washington, D.C. And I think that my training and my background as a Coloradan gives me that ability.
So if you're saying 98% of the time you're voting the values of the district, irrespective of what you believe, how often roughly were you voting against what you believe?
It's not a question of whether I believe in it or not. I believe in the district, and I believed in representing it the way that it wanted to be represented.
Well, I'm not sure that's an answer to the question. I mean, I think we all know there's sometimes we do things because we feel like we have to do them even if we don't believe in them. If you're saying you voted the values of the district 98% of the time, my question to you is, how often did your own values align with the district's?
Most of the time.
Most of the time, okay. How about on this issue of immigration, right? Because that's a pretty wild swing from you saying defund ICE and CBP to condemning the Biden administration for not being tough enough on immigration. What are your true beliefs on that?
Well, I think a large part of what you're characterizing as a swing is the difference between being a state legislator that can send a letter basically saying we think that there are issues with the way that ICE is treating people in Colorado, to then being able to, as a congressperson, vote directly on actual policy that will happen at the federal level.
So I want to move on to some other stuff, but I just find this interesting because I think there are very few people in Congress who will be as frank about it as you're being, where you're saying this is how I vote, this is how I approach it. So I'm just interested in hearing about this. Can you give me an example of one time when you said, I'm going to vote the district's values, but my values are different? Just one example.
I think it happened a number of times, whether it was around immigration, whether it was around the fact that it's an oil, an oil and gas district, whether there's a whole myriad of issues where it was really about what's important to the district and the majority of the people in the district.
Okay, I would love one specific. Will you give me one specific?
I can't think of a specific off the top of my head.
Okay. About the issue of federal funding for Colorado, there's a lot of talk about that. Just this week, the president basically said he wants his team to create a list of so-called sanctuary cities and sanctuary states for him to then take punitive action against. What do you think of this idea of stripping federal funding away from jurisdictions at the local and state level that won't use their law enforcement to enforce immigration law?
It is not the role of the president. It is not what should be done. We should be able to accept that states are their own entities. We're united as the United States, and the federal government has its place. And not using federal funding, especially federal funding that is going to affect healthcare, the environment, infrastructure, so many different things, education, and using it as a cudgel to punish people that don't agree with what you think.
So you think Colorado should make its own separate decisions, Denver should make its own separate decisions on what local and state resources go into federal immigration enforcement?
Yeah, it's not the job of local entities to enforce federal immigration law.
So I take it then you would not support changing Colorado law to encourage more cooperation between immigration agents and local law enforcement? How do you feel about that?
I mean, I can't vote on Colorado law, but I think that the federal government is in charge of enforcement of immigration laws. It's one of actually the few things that that is very clearly delineated as the job of the federal government, and so it should remain with the federal government.
I'm sure you've noticed Gabe Evans spends a lot of his time talking about state issues. So state issues are going to be part of a campaign if you're to run against Gabe Evans. So want to get clarity on this because I think it's going to be a big issue in 2026. Do you think Colorado law should allow more cooperation between local law enforcement and ICE?
I think that federal funding should not be conditional on how Colorado interacts or doesn't interact with federal agencies.
Cool. That's a separate question, though. Do you think Colorado law should change to allow more cooperation between local law enforcement and ICE?
Given that it is the job of the federal government, probably no.
Okay. President Trump is threatening to strip the tax status from nonprofits that he doesn't like because they oppose his agenda or they're into things that he doesn't support. You voted with Republicans to give the incoming Trump administration even more power to punish nonprofits. You voted to give the Treasury Secretary unilateral power to strip a nonprofit's tax status by labeling them supporters of terrorism. That's currently held up in the Senate. But Trump administration is moving against nonprofits now. Why was giving the administration more power to target nonprofits a good idea?
That was another of those bills that is multi-tiered, and what the other thing that that bill included was taxation of hostages, people who are overseas who have been taken hostage by another government, and whether we should exempt them from paying taxes. That's what drove me to vote yes on that bill.
Even if it meant giving the Trump administration unilateral power to strip the tax status of nonprofits and label them supporters of terrorism?
Well, I knew at that point that the Senate and the president would not let that become law. Because the fact that Biden wasn't going to sign it. So I guess this is what I'm getting into, because this is the second time we've run into this. This is the second time where you've said, well, I voted for something even though I think it was a bad idea because I knew it wasn't going to become law. Is that what folks send you to Washington to do? I think that they send you to do all of the calculations on legislation, to weigh all of the risks and benefits, just like you do when you go to the doctor and you say, hey, I have cancer. Should I have chemotherapy or not? Well, yes, the chemotherapy might help with some issues, and it'll make others difficult. It's a constant calculation that you have to do in the same way as a legislator of parts of bills that are good, parts that are not as good or not as savory, and you have to balance that with what you think your constituents want and how they're going to react to it.
I guess I have one last kind of overarching question. During your one term in Congress, you voted for a number of bills that you acknowledged were just Republican messaging bills, and had they actually become law, they would have been destructive or damaging. You voted for all that stuff, and you still lost. Was it worth it?
I think that for the most part, my constituents understood and appreciated that I was trying to put their interests and their opinions into action, and I'm proud of the way that I represented the district.
Yadira Caraveo, I appreciate you coming in, taking all of our questions. Look forward to talking to you during the Democratic primary to come.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.